Good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon for people who are online. I appreciate you being here. I know it's a holiday coming. Lots of people already take a holiday already, so really appreciate to have an opportunity to have this dialogue with you. Now, my talk is on payment for ecosystem service. I'm focused on the forest-based ecosystem service, and have a project on forest carbon in the US. So mostly focus on, I guess I will highlight some of the challenges right now. Give you a little bit of flavor of US forestry and where Auburn University is. I mean, Auburn University is in this blue star over here. It's in the state of Alabama, but it's very close, actually, very close to Atlanta International Airport. That's why we come in and out. Now, if you think about forestry, there are three sections. One is US South, one is Pacific Northwest, and one is the North and Lake State. The US South is a political concept. Okay, it's not a geography. You cannot say California is US South. You cannot say New Mexico is US South. US South is those 13 states separate from the US, so lead to a civil war. So from anywhere from Virginia to Texas, that's the region. The other region, Auburn is right located in terms of forestry, right in the center. Right now, the US South produces about 60% of the timber in the country. The US as a whole produces about the roundwood production about 19%. Industry, I'm not talking about field wood, but industry production. This is my university. Over there is a central administration office, 150 years old building. Some of the sports highlight, and by the way, thanks for Bram for this. This is a connection that where we have had this, and he has full experience of this. If you think about the craziness of any soccer fan or football fan, I mean, this is as crazy as anybody else. My college, Auburn University is the largest university in the state. It's one of the top 100 public and private university in the US. Ranked 98, 99, 97. Maybe over the years, maybe 1 or 3, something around 100-ish. We have 13 colleges. College of Forestry, Wildlife, and Environment is the smallest one of the smallest one. The smallest one probably of College of Nursing. So we have this program, forestry, undergraduate degrees, forestry, forest engineering. We have wildlife. Now we have a new degree as wildlife enterprise management. It means that people look at hunting lunch and so on and so forth. Natural resource and environment, we have a GIS degrees. For graduate program, we have applied economics degrees in forestry. Now that's a joint programs. We have a Department of Economics and Department of Agriculture Economics and Rural Sociology and my own college. All the students do the same issue, micro, macro econometrics, but they write a dissertation in forestry, and therefore we have this kind of program. We have obviously have a PhD in forestry, wildlife, earth systems sciences. We have master degrees, various master degrees. Overall, we have right now about 700 students in my college, about 180 graduate students, 500-ish undergraduate students. Our goal is increase the number to about 1,000. 700 undergraduate students and about 250 graduate students. Also, another shameless self-promotion. I'm the editor-chief of this journal, so we'll welcome all of you to submit a journal articles to this journal. With that, this is my outline. Basically, I'll talk about the payment for ecosystems from the theory and case study What I want to highlight is the joint production process. And because of joint production, then you lead to some kind of trade-off. When you set up this kind of element payment scheme, and then I will highlight some challenge right now in the US in terms of forest carbon market. And then we'll open for question and answer. I do not want to spend more than 35 minutes, and I would like to have more dialogue. So let's talk about it fundamentally. Talk about a forest ecosystem, anything. This is the so-called the total value of forest, and it's the London School of Economics. In 80s and 90s, they think about this. But I always think about it, any forest. You could have this so-called, I call it extractive value, means that you're going to harvest the timber. You can take something out and from there. You are going to do hunting. You're going to taking wildlife out of it. Another is non-extractive, that's including all we call it environmental service or ecosystem service. So water conservation, biodiversity, climate mitigation, and so on. Obviously, we economists, we have those other preservation values, existence value, option value, bequest value, and so on and so forth. The recreational value can be extractive or non-extractive. Means that if you just walk in a forest, it's not extractive. But hunting as a recreation ways, it's extractive. We all know that the UN minimum ecosystem assessment back about 17, 18 years published a very well-known ecosystem assessment. My view is that it's raised the interest, but it's so holistic, it's so big that you could not do lots of trade-off with it. So I reference it, but I'm using my own framework. For practical purpose, for this talk, I'm just to separate, to simplify things. One is timber, which is private goods. One is environmental service. You can think of one environmental service or bundles environmental service, so on. But we can start with one. So with that, and again, I said timber is a private goods, environmental service. Most of those are calculated as public goods. Most of public goods are not marketed, so the effective price, marginal price is zero. It is very hard to devise some kind of incentive to encourage the supply just because they are public goods. We know the demand of the public goods are increasing over time. If you do not believe in environmental Kuznets curve, that's okay, but it's a bell-shaped curve. But the overall trends, as people's income increase, population increase, the demand of environmental service also increase. So typically, traditionally, how government do it? Government through regulations, set aside taxation, so on and so forth, try to, encourage the supply and let the supply meet the demand. Another major hurdles in terms of environmental service is their production function can be complicated, can be complex. They're unknown, both from space and time. It's or at least uncertain. Let's think about a below ground carbon. That's a huge issue right now. I mean, above ground, it's kind of relatively easy. If we see a forest, we know how much timber we have, and then we can figure out the carbon. But below ground is a huge issue, and nobody have a good understanding of that. Often, public goods are joint produced with some kind of private good. In this case, you have a forest. I'm talking about private forest, and then timber is the private goods, and so this is kind of a joint production process. How do you solve the public goods issues? And you need to unbundle them, make them some kind of tradable goods and service, or you can supply them through some kind of political market. Tax and subsidy, regulation, and government ownership, those are all public markets. But all of those, we just through any public goods, and you could think about it. You make it collective goods first, and then make it private goods. As for carbon, we're talking about today is a true global public goods, and now we are doing this national determined contribution. Make it a private goods, and then every country handle it. Anyway, that's all the theory. We're talking about a direction of making some kind of public goods private, at least some degree of private. So as I said, there are many ways to make the supply and demand of public goods meet each other. One way is this payment for ecosystem service. So I have a definition over here. The typical definition is some kind of just voluntary transaction. It's like a cost-sharing transaction, so people negotiate. But in fact, if you look at the payment for ecosystem service, it including government financed program. When you have a government finance programs, it's coercive. It's through taxation as well. So you could see also some kind of centralized Peake type of solution. In the literature, it's harder to differentiate all of those, but there are examples which I will show you just for a second. For my talk, I'm including both. A good example is in the US is we call the conservation reserve program, where the landowners, if you are agreeing with switch your marginal agriculture land to grass or forestry cover, the government pay you for the conversion cost and rent the land for 10 years and give you some payment on that. So that's tax to me is a subsidy, tax and subsidy. But for landowner is payment for my ecosystem service to a bundle. So my PES definition includes both. The theoretical foundation of any PES is basically you may use it as a good forest if you convert a forest to pastures, to other use, you have a private benefit to the landowner is pretty high. And to make the difference, to make the land as a forest land captive, so you needed to pay people some kind of minimum payment. Okay, that's the minimum payment for as a compensation for some kind of external environmental service. But if you convert forest land to other use, you will be associated with the loss of public goods, environmental service we talk about. And then if you practice conservation forestry, it means that you do not harvest as much timber as intensively, your cutting block will be smaller, your rotation area will be longer, you need to pay more. Okay, that's okay. Theoretically, it's fairly straightforward. So how do we make this? Okay, some kind of payment for this environmental benefit. That's the payment. That's the idea. Now we all know that's ideal, but everything has a transaction cost. So it's not that easy to devise this kind of stuff. If it costs too much, then let's not just do it. So any PES, we're talking about property protection rules. It's a law in economics, in a sense. Landowners under some kind of private property rule regulation is that this is that the private landowner have the right to sell at whatever the price the environmental service they provide. So to me, this is a voluntary PES, and it's like a transaction, a private market transaction. So landowner can charge a price, whatever price they can charge, as long as the market can bear. Now another rule is private landowner are protected under some kind of liability rules. In this sense, that the landowner, in this case, the landowners are going to be compensated, but they're not going to be able to set the price. So this compensation is mostly under the US is some kind of eminent domain rules. So private property get paid, but paid at a fair price set by the government. Okay, So that's the eminent domain rule. Liability. In either case, they get paid. One is the landowner can set the price, one is the government set the price with reference to government. So this is pretty much what I'm focused on, those two highlight. Obviously, you could, the neighbors have the property rights, then you have regulations. So if the landowner could be regulated, you have to provide a certain amount of service out of it. Another case is the neighbor undertakes some kind of liability rules. If the landowner do not produce them, they could be fined. This is not my interest. I'm interested in the first two of the liability rules. So this is my central theme of my talk. Let's spend a few minutes on this simple supply and demand. Okay, we have a simple demand supply curve of environmental service. Okay, we have a demand for environmental service, presumably downward sloping, and there is a supply of that service. Now, it looks like a messy. Actually, it's very easy to understand this graph. So let's say, okay, you have a market supply and demand. You have a price. You have a quantity. That's a market. Okay, that's assumed. But just because of joint production, I am as a private landowner. I produce timber as a private goods. Now that production has a joint production with some kind of environmental service. So this joint production, there is a certain errors. The production, the opportunity cost for me is zero. Okay, for produce that environmental service, that is zero. I could produce timber at the same time generate like benefit for bird, stuff like that. But theoretically, there is a portion that's zero. Now, I further go this supply curve. I'm even willingly to voluntarily supply a portion of environmental service at my own cost. No need compensation. So what I'm saying is that I'm probably not willing to supply over here for my own interest. This is could be, you think about, good reputation. I could think about, I truly enjoy endangered species on my land. I could enjoy hunting. I could enjoy my natural heritage. Okay, I could say, okay, my grandparents had these big timbers, and for whatever reason, I'm willing to produce a portion of it. So, in the sense of this PL is a private landowners. Okay, at this price, I'm willing to supply at this G point. Okay, at this price. Anything beyond to the left of it, there is no need for compensation, no need for payment for whatsoever, right? Theoretically, okay? No need for payment. What you need is worry is this portion. So as typically there is no payment or whatever, no rule, no regulations, you have undersupply. That's all I'm going to supply. How do we get from G to Q, that quantity, and how do we get the equilibrium? That's my interest. Okay, there are several ways. That's all this several ways to do it. One is purely market. Okay, in the most economically efficient ways, you do not pay anything over on this side, and you pay the supply and demand as a market. Okay, pure transaction. The best example is French water. Examples, okay? Privately you negotiate, and somehow you set a price. That's one solution. Another one is if you could identify the opportunity cost of landowners. So this portion, this portion. If you could identify the opportunity cost, then you discriminate those portions, and I'm not going to pay anything, but anything beyond, I'm going to pay your opportunity cost. That would be ideal. That would be another solution. That would be. So I mentioned the best example over here is as long the option one, let's see if I mention the opening one is identify point and then have this voluntary payment for each service. You settle supply and demand, you negotiate. Other one is the opportunity cost. So this opportunity cost is this is GHEQ, and as long as the transition cost from the buyer's perspective, the demand perspective, as long as the transition cost is less than this portion, okay, think about it, less than this portion, it's affordable. It's affordable to them. I personally visited this retail, this is water, bottled water production over there. And what I figured out, their model is so-called opportunity cost plus. They pay the landowner all the opportunity cost. They pay a little bit more, but they're not going to pay everything over here. So that's the example. And then I mentioned this conservation reserve program in the United States. Let me spend 1 minute on this conservation reserve program. The U.S. ranked as the biggest one of the biggest subsidy program, but they try to find the opportunity cost of individual landowners. They give scores of your land in terms of slope, productivity, and your action in terms of are you going to plant native species or non-native species, and this kind of things. So they all try to. So they rank. They have this score system. They try to identify landowner your opportunity cost here. Another landowner your opportunity is over here, and that way they pay it in that sense. Now, are they 100% correct? No. That's not what my point is. They try to identify the transition cost of it, and try to design some kind of efficient system. Now, what if we have a system pay every landowner the same price? Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. You have a question? Oh, no. Okay. So what if we pay everyone irrespective? There's one price slot. Now, obviously, if you pay everybody a price, there is a windfall for those landowners. If we pay anything below this P and PLs, you are not going to reach the equilibrium, right? It's not supply and demand. You are not going to meet the demand in terms of supply. So in China, there is a program is converted sloped agriculture land to forestry. Everybody get paid the same price. Everyone, as long as you have, the Yellow River, north of Yellow River, everybody get the same price. Obviously, those people, lots of people, some people, if their opportunity cost is here, they get a windfall. Now those people, you are forced to pay. And as long as the pay price is lower than the people, and you're not going to meet this supply and demand. So all of those illustrations, I want to identify two trade-offs. Okay, one is that from the buyer's perspective, you incurring transaction cost. By studying the landowners, the individuals, and the tracks, the individual supply curve, aggregate supply curve, and discriminate somehow, some way, and with some kind of differentiation by pay people's opportunity cost. That's one way. Or you are going to suffer some kind of inefficiency. Those inefficiencies coming from the payment should not be paid unless people got a windfall profit. Then the second one is the total payment is insufficient in terms of induce adequate land use change. That means it's meet supply and demand. All these conclusions are coming from this. So you choose the poison pill. Okay, you spend the time identify landowners' opportunity cost, or you're not going to be efficient. So there will be inefficiency incurred. So that's the trade-off. Which one is better? I'm not saying. Depends on the government capacity. If you have the tools, power to differentiate the landowners' operating costs, it's a good choice. If you don't, you might have to pay a price through this kind of system. That's all the theoretical stuff. And by the way, I published this article a few years ago. Anybody has interest, I can have a look at this. I have used this framework to analyze all other government intervention, from public ownership to regulation to subsidy to conservation easement, and then cap and trade. So in relation to what's the trade-off, what's the benefit and cost. Okay, so I'm not going to get into those ones, just focus on the PES right now. If we have two or more environmental service, obviously, I mean, we could do it as some kind of bundled payment or stack payment, which I'm not going to get into too much of that. But this well-cited study, at least in my profession, basically say most forests you have 1, 2, or 3. There are not too many. I mean, very few of them are more than 4 use. So, I mean, you can deal with 1, you can deal with 2, and that's covered 80 or 90% of the forest, basically. So, let me try to close to summarize. In terms of the theory, PS is one way to internalize externality, try to privatize public goods. There is a continuum of this whole PS is purely private transaction to some kind of political market, and sometimes a mix of both. And the joint production of timber, which is a public good, and environmental service, which is club goods and minimum and often public goods, make a portion of the supply curve of the environmental service free, and therefore force the user to make this choice. You either spend money to identify the individual and aggregate supply curve and then enforce the contract, or you suffer a loss associated with paying too much or paying too little. So which one is better in terms of a political market or private market? Which one is better? I mean, private market works better if you have a single environmental service and the benefits are very well defined, and you're talking about watershed or something. The transaction costs are relatively low, and the contract and property rights law are strong as required. Otherwise, you go through this government-induced political market. So I already repeated what's working for the political market. The issue with the political market is that subject to the tragedy of political comments. The lawmakers often make lousy decisions. It's not very efficient either. Because carbon is a true public good, a global public good, we need a global commitment first. We all know this, the urgency of this. What we think about climate change, to me, is airs, clean airs, without CO2, without a greenhouse gas, and the resource has become very, very scarce and very, very quickly. We need to reduce this carbon emission. We only have like 10, 15 years left if we want to reduce we want to control the global temperature to 1.5 degree. And again, we mentioned this national determined contribution to make the global public goods, club goods. There are lots of issues with this as well, because right now it's voluntary, and it's globally, there is a political game played around. Give you one other example. The developing countries, after the Paris Agreement, they committed $100 billion to developing countries. it's nowhere near close. I mean, we are already 8 years afterward. I did work in FAO for 2.5 years. Look at the global level, it's very, very controversial. Now, let's look at it, just look at the forestry and climate change. Obviously, it's a two-way street. Forests are impacted by climate change and caused more fires, more intensive fires, insects and disease, and storm, and so on. But on the other hand, forests can help mitigate climate change. And there's one of several ways. One is this bioenergy. Another way is REDD+, reduce emissions through reduction in deforestation and forest degradation. And people have started using this so-called life cycle analysis, studied this carbon. If you use wood in buildings, and can last longer. And obviously, you could reforestation, and so-called IMF is improved management of forest over there. With respect to carbon market, right now, globally, there are 3 types. One is complacent market. New Zealand, Australia, California, those 3 regions have this compliant market. Basically, it's cap and trade. Okay, there are all kinds of issues. I'm aware of all kinds of issues associated with, but fundamentally, it's a cap and trade. So the challenge is when you set a cap. Well, you set a cap is correct or not. Or in terms of payment, you pay some people too much or not. So that's one. The second one actually is much bigger in the United States. Is the voluntary market. That's people design protocols and sign up landowners under contract, then purchased by corporations like airline industry, oil and gas industry, energy industry, and so on and so forth. Last but not least, the company buy timberland and do the carbon offsetting in-house. They claim that they got this net zero emission already, or they are going to do it in 2025 or 2030. They do these calculations. So right now in the US, we have all 3 of those. And I say all of them is kind of, to a degree, wild west. And just because when I talk about this program design and so on and so forth. So reduce the CO2 through forestry. I'm not talking about REDD+, but we know it's a good technology. It's proven, and people have done studies where managed forests do have long-term carbon benefit. And the question is how to offer landowners. This is PES, financial incentive to increase the CO2 uptake by the forest. That's what I'm interested in. So Wall Street Journal articles on some industry and some study I'm quoted over here. So in theory, this works. Forest-based climate solution. Okay, in theory it works. I have cited this very high powered in science and nature. This study, basically forest as a real solution is low cost solution. Big data, macro level analysis globally and countrywide, it works. The question is this permanence and additionality, and how to make the market operational. And that's the PES I'm talking about. Or you through some kind of tax and subsidy. By the way, the United States is not going to implement this tax and subsidy as a way of combating climate change. That's politically given. So I'm also interested in the implications. So how the landowner change and so on and so forth. As I said, I have a research project right now that I'm leading. There are three components of this project. One is what I call it carbon market, 1M. Then we have a measurement, carbon measurement, so the second M. The third one is management and income. So 3M, that's the ideas. So I'm responsible for the carbon market. We all know this Kyoto Protocol. We have the clean development mechanism. Very few forestry projects, very few of them. In the US, we have a Chicago climate market which collapsed shortly after the financial crisis. California has a cap and trade very similar to the Australia one and New Zealand one. The problem is over credit means that they pay the landowner who should have never been paid. Okay, the calculations, scientific literature aside, is close to 30% of the total credit should never be issued. Oh, that's what I call it. Pay the people that should not be paid at all. We have all those projects. This nature capital exchange, which is just to say, if a landowner you want to defer it 1 more year, they pay you something. Now this company may be going to be bellied up. They laid off like 60% of their labor force in the last 4 months. Anyway, there is credibility issues. Those are all the protocols follows right now. Some of them big, some of them looking at family forest, and some of them look at big corporations. So target on different market, and it's really wild west. And one example I'm showing the price. 1 ton of CO2 should be 1 ton of CO2, right? But this price are completely different. I mean, so much is sometimes 3-4 times difference. So the credibility, the crediting, and so on and so forth, that's issues. Let me summarize. This is the second last of my slide. So the challenge, what I see is this carbon market is a privatization of public goods, which invite trade-off among public goods. I mean by that is that, okay, if you put a price on carbon, what about biodiversity? What about water quality? Okay, that's one thing. Then you have a trade-off like with private goods. One of the issues is in the US right now, if you let a tree grows, it grows too big, nobody is going to take it. The sawmills want to take their optical log is 18 inches, right? And if you grow anything beyond like 28 inch, it becomes pulpwood, it becomes worthless. So that's that type of trade-off. And as I said, it's a wild west in terms of voluntary market development. We need a rating system, we need a accounting standard, and so on and so forth. And the transaction cost is humongous right now. If the market is pay $100 and trickle down to the landowner, maybe 10 bucks left. What's left over is all the MRVs. It's all the transaction cost, the verification, and so on and so forth. And we are interested in the implication on landowners' income at a small standard level, at a forest level, at a regional level, and a country level. And the key idea is how to pay the landowner to induce their behavior change and achieve this climate mitigation goals. And interestingly, I asked here is at what carbon price would wood products such as mass timber win over concrete and steels, and vice versa. You could ask the question, same thing. This is the trade-off between public good and private good. And now, there's an interesting story is that okay, when you have a wood-based buildings, you sequester carbon for 100 years or 70 years. So who gets the credit? Right now, it's unclear, and I know a professor tried to raise money, raise fund, and try to do this kind of stuff. So it's at a very, very early stage, and we're talking about challenge, the transition cost associated with it, and public goods aspect, and private trade-off with private goods. We're at the very beginning of this project, and so that's what we're facing to, and hopefully we could make some progress out of it. With that, I think just about 30, 40 minutes. It's pretty good. Let's open up for question and answers.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. Now the floor is open for questions and further discussions.
Anyone? Yes, right.
Okay. Just to raise the discussion, you raised two important issues in forest-based climate change mitigation, particularly around those bioenergy or RED plus, about the permanence, and the second is about the
additionality and knowledge. Yeah.
So, given your research or experience, how do we deal with it? Because oftentimes when we talk about any kind of carbon mitigation scheme, these issues might come because we don't really know what's the time frame, 30 year, 40 year, 50 year. Let's fix the time frame. That might be easier. But how do we address it from one cycle to the another cycle?
Right. I think one way it's solved, not solved, but closer to what I think could be beneficial is the New Zealand system. Basically, you have a deadline, you have a date. They started with 1989. Anything before, if you have a forest, I'm not going to count it. Anything afterward, we're going to count it as carbon credit. So let's say if you have a sheep agriculture, now you convert it to forestry, then you can take the benefit of it. So carbon in New Zealand, red alpine grows about 28 to 30 years. So they do an average. They say, okay, here's your growth. There is this, growth curve, and then you harvest, right, back and forth. So they give you a window of 16 years. So why 16? 16 is middle way, okay? So afterward, you are going to withdraw some carbons. So you are not going to penalize, but you will be sent to a bank. You must reforest. So it means that you draw down, but you have to reforest. If you convert it to pasture again, you have to pay back this stuff. This is to a degree, and cap and trade system to a degree, it works. Okay. I think just because New Zealand is a small country, I know there are lots of problems with social with it, and people get in this. But eventually it will have a better chance of succeeding. Another thing is the California system. The California system is also a cap and trade system. I'm doing an article and compare those different cap and trade systems. The problem with California was irrespective. There's no date to set up a date and stuff like that. Their criteria is that your forest must be higher than the regional average. So inventory. Okay, they have a U.S. Forest Service have this called a forest inventory analysis unit. So whatever is maybe half of the state or several counties, whatever. So the average is 100 units. But your forest is 120, you got to pay for it, irrespectively. Okay, in the sense of that, if I have a high slope, I have 200 years old trees, we're not going to harvest it. But just because unfortunately I have had this forest, I got to pay for the 20 unit that's higher. And I'm obliged to keep my forest above this regional average for 100 years. So that's their scheme. There are lots of more criticism on this. How it get work, I think it will be a mix of volunteer market and cap and trade. Eventually, it will be cap and trade. Now, interestingly, the state of Washington this year is going to have a cap and trade scheme. There is a regional RIGI, the 12 states from New York to Maine, they have direct. They also have a cap and trade scheme, but they do not have forestry. Forestry is not part of it. So how do you put it then the forestry as part of this another change? My point is, I'm a believer of cap and trade to a degree, even for the California system. You got those 30% of overcrediting. You got them paper. These people gaming system, low-hanging fruits, whatever. But you cannot do it anymore in the future. So you weed out those people already. And as carbon price goes up, it may be more attractive, and you will attract it a lot more. I'm not 100% convinced about the voluntary market. It's so. I'm invited by Rice University, one of the big university in Houston, and they are writing another protocol right now. So everybody is trying to gain this. Interestingly, I got a phone call from fertilizer application people. In the US South forest, there are close to 1 million acres of plantation. People fly airplanes and drop fertilizer over there, application. So fertilization and forestry is very common. The guy called me and said, I would like to cap a share of this market because my fertilization increases the tree growth rate, right? Capture carbon. I almost laughed, and then we had a good talk. I said, number one, fertilization, the production transportation of it, release enormous amount of carbon. That's number one. Number two, I should tax you because you pollute the water. And the nitrogen and stuff, there is a portion is going to leak to the water system. I said you could fertilize, use the water in New Orleans, which is a low part of Mississippi River, and fertilize somewhere else. I think he gave up this idea. I said, probably you're not going to sell it. I mean, yes, you increase the tree growth rate. I mean, everybody want to, there's a market, somebody going to pay me a price. I want to get a portion of it. Anyway, so this is the trade-off we're talking about. I'm very unconfident with the voluntary market myself. I wish there was a unified US market, but the political system in the US is so, left and right now. They're not going to put their act together. Therefore, you have this kind of wild west going on for a number of years.
We have one question from online attendee. Dave, can you unmute yourself and ask the question, or just shall I read here?
Sure, thanks for the presentation. I'm interested in the Wild West that you were just talking about, and you mentioned that the voluntary carbon markets have very high transaction costs. I think you said 90%, is that right? And so my question is, what do these transaction costs consist of? What are those costs being spent on?
Well, transition costs, interestingly, everyone knows what transition costs are, but there isn't no unified transition cost definitions over here. So the simplest definition to me is the cost of defining and maintaining a property right. Okay, defining is one thing. I mean, we know defining in the sense of real property, a house, for example, the lock, the fence, right? And also you have a legal system. You need somebody, invade or somebody invade your house or steal something from you. You can have a legal system. This is all the transition costs. It started with information. Information including production function. Okay, I said public goods production function is not very well defined. So including this delineation of the property rights, and then you through negotiation, contracting, and for forestry, for this carbon climate market, you need permanence. Its permanence is additionality, it's no leakage, that's critical. So therefore, this measurement, this enforcement, and this reporting, the credibility, this all part of the transition cost. And that's why it's so much here. Okay? People on the market are competing with the different protocols right now. Okay, try to sell to the investor, people in the Wall Street. And this come and goes, they are also. So those are all transition costs to me. So if I'm selling carbon credit, means that I sell my property rights. Okay, somebody isn't going to get it. So how do you verify everything is transition cost? Hope I answer your question. Anybody else? Yes.
You mentioned earlier the challenges of stacked credits for things like biodiversity or other services on top of a market credit for carbon. Could you expand a little bit more on how that impacts on the different systems, cap and trade versus voluntary? When you put a voluntary, for example, voluntary biodiversity market on top of a cap and trade carbon market.
Right. I would say it's this way. If you have a cap and trade on carbon, then you have something else, a voluntary market on biodiversity, voluntary market on water. That's why once you set a price for carbon, for example, and you could trickle down all other markets. That's what I mean by stacking this stuff. I have not sorted out like once you have the first stage and then the second stage, and it always voluntary transaction depends on the circumstance, the supply and demand. But that's what I was alluding to. But I have not sorted over thoroughly on that just yet.
Okay. If there is no
Last question.
what, okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think it's.
Yes, that is just.
Yes, I would like to discuss a little bit about because of the best screen in terms of carbon is, I think in my point of view, is more like for the large size company or large size industry. But how about the opportunity for the small scale smallholder?
Yes.
They can join into carbon market, and in this way, how is it very hard for smaller to verify the transaction cost and to verify how much additional additionality for them to clarify that, well, my forest in terms of 10 years can have additional carbon like that. This one is very hard for smallholder, also in developing countries, now also facing a lot of issues how to clarify with the seller, with the buyer from the developed country. So how to deal with this one? Do you have any experience?
Thank you for the question. Here is a program called Family Forest Carbon Programs.
Yeah.
This is focused on the medium-sized, small size. The smallest one, anything less than 50 acres, nobody is going to pick it up. But 50 acres to 200, so you could be certified altogether. Like you could have 20 landowners in the regions, and somebody give you a measurement, and that reduces the transaction cost and also allow the landowner to participate in that programs. And this one is for the big ones. People own hundreds of thousands of acres and millions go this. So they all have different focus. They all different have, and right now the big ones are this one, and that one was hard as anything, but it may be bellying up because of the issue. Answer the issue was permanence, additionality, and knowledge issue. There are some questions on that. So you think about just 1 year deferred harvest. You defer it. I defer 1 year, but my neighbor harvest. And then it's just deferred 1 year. And so people say, how do you do the permanence? Maybe yes, to answer your question, there are some programs you can bundle all of the landowner together. In that sense, you reduce the transaction cost, so make the small landowner be able to participate. And there was a Guardian article in January something like they looked at the red plus in Peru or something. They also 90% of this bogus. Now that's not what I'm talking about, but it's one of the carbon programs through red plus, reduced emissions through reduction in deforestation and reduction and forest degradation. So it shows that one thing, international transaction is even more difficult. Okay. Yes, sir.
So, I'm interested to know, I mean, if there are any mechanisms to help, like in developing countries, to participate in this kind of program.
Developing countries?
Yeah, I mean, if the growers are,
The answer is yes. The answer is yes, and we're going to go there. So one developing country, one of the mechanism is through this Red Plus, I already mentioned. Another one is through this carbon crediting or carbon. This we're talking about fungibilities, like for example, carbon in Indonesia, how it to be recognized in Norway, for example. Okay, I'm aware Indonesia government do not want to sell their carbon credit just because for their country they want their national determined contribution to counter on forest to be part of it. I'm also aware some of you may heard a investing firm by the name of New Forest. It's based in Sydney, Australia. It's one of the largest timberland investment companies. Right now, they have a fund. It's called Asia Fund, based in Singapore. So they attract investors. They raise the money like $300 million. There are two types of shares. Okay, one type of shares. So everyone claims the 2% returns. Anything below, we all get 2%. Anything beyond like 8%, everybody got it. But in the middle, there is one class of shares get the benefit of carbon for the carbon accounting for my own ESG, okay, accounting. But I do not get the profit of it. My point is there are all kinds of mechanisms right now for energy company in France, for example, try to buy forest somewhere else and in developing countries and somehow get a chunk. And for their own accounting, they say, okay, by 2030, we got carbon neutral on this. There are various ways to do that. And hopefully is all the developing countries develop their own scheme so the landowner can directly benefit. But as of now, it's kind of all the different directions. The government of Indonesia take action. We're not going to sell any carbon credit from forestry anymore. In this case of New Forest case, their investment, one of the primary goals is that they can claim the carbon benefit of it. At least one group of the investors. So there are different way of mechanisms.